Good morning. So, we start the fourth... Oh, excuse me.
Gesundheit.
Oh, Mensch, thank you. Apologise for that. Not very polite. So, we are now about to start the fourth of the Rambams 13 principles. When I began to look at this, if I'm really honest, the very first time I looked at it, I thought, okay, I thought I kind of understood it. The more I began to delve into what's really going on here, I uncovered something that, really thanks to you, having been forced to prepare and to learn a bit of Torah, for which I am genuinely grateful. I've uncovered a world that I was unaware of, I think, properly. What do I mean? The fourth Yesod is the final one, which talks about Hashem. Right? The first four are the only four that talk about Him. The rest talk about our relationship to Him and things that He, and the way that He relates to us, and what will be, the eschatological, the Mashiach, Tchias HaMeisei, and the others will come later, and accountability, Schar V'Onesh, davening, etc. This is the final one. It's not a trilogy, it's not a trinity, it's whatever. And the first thing we're going to need to separate and understand is, in what way is this fourth one, what is its central point? What is it trying to tell me that I did not already know? Mm-hmm. And why is it so fundamental? And we're going to, as we go through this, I think I'm going to take the opportunity, if I may, because it touches on modern cosmology as well. We're going to talk about creation in terms of ex nihilo, Platonic, the Rambam, because we're going to have to learn a good few prokim in Moreh Nevuchim, where he dedicates himself to explaining his idea about the origin of the world versus the Platonic idea and the Aristotelian model. And then I will blineder as we go through this, because this is something that I know a little bit about. I'm going to update you with modern cosmology as well, because it actually all then becomes part of it. So it'll be a little bit multidisciplinary as we go a bit later, and we'll discover a bit about Newton, a bit about all the way down to Steve Weinberg and Feynman and et al. Davies and et al. Okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, you're good with that? That's sketching out. It's going to take a while. It's not going to be a quick one. Not that any of them have been. But, okay, having said that, let's delve in. Let's dive right in. So, today, I know we only have 2 sessions this week. Is that correct? Because I believe you're off Wednesday, Thursday. Is that right? Yeah. So let's see whether we manage to get through at least these sheets today. And today we'll also hopefully discover something about the Rambam's writings. And let's see. With no further ado, V'hayesod haravi hakadmus. Hakadmus. Mm-hmm. How would you translate cadmus?
Precedent.
Let's see. And he immediately, kedem. This word is going to be a really important word. When we use the word kedem, kadmoinoi shel olam, kedem. It means east, but it also means, usually kedem means before. Also, kadmoin, yeah. Prior to. Okay, but it also is a word that is used in creating certain models of understanding about the world and creation, and we'll come back to that. Let's give the Rambam a chance to explain. V'hu, what do I mean by this? Shezeh ha'echad ha'metu'ar, that the one that we have hitherto, up until this point, we have been describing, well, describing is a bad word, but we're not going to go revisit that. He who is incorporeal, he who is only one, he who is the imperative of his own existence, he that is the only thing that is non-contingent existence,
Yeah.
hu hakadmoin behechlet. He is the first. Behechlet. Now, behechlet, that word could potentially, I hesitate because it could potentially have two connotations. Again, remember, it's a Hebrew translation of the Arabic, but still, let me lay out a suffix here for you. Is the Rambam saying that he is behechlet? Does that mean absolute? He is the first. The first. The first what? The first anything. He is kadmoin behechlet. Or, possibly does the Rambam mean, he is the first relative to anything and everything else. Now, they may sound like the same thing. We shall see. Okay?
Well, it could be very problematic to assert that Hashem is the first, because that means that he has a beginning. I would say he has no beginning and no end.
Very good.
That's
Very
the
good.
problem.
So very good. Very good. And of course, we lack the capacity to think in terms outside of time and outside of space. We cannot. But within this, we are going to discuss the Rambam's attitude towards the time and space, or as today it would be known in modern cosmology, the space-time continuum. Okay? Because this all is going to fall under the remit of this Yesod because of that. So let's see. Bearing in mind that this is a Hebrew translation of the Arabic, but let's do our best. So the fourth Yesod is that this one Hashem is kadmoin behechlet. For the moment, we'll just translate it as he is absolutely the first. V'chol nimtza zulosai. And anything that can be discovered other than him, who bilti kadmoin beyachas elov, cannot be prior relative to him, relative to anything else that can be discerned, observed, examined. He is before it. So it's sounding quite relative so far. Okay? He says very clearly, anything else that can be discovered, discerned, is cannot be before him. He is before anything and everything else. Okay. And the proofs to this are in many books. Fascinating. He doesn't see fit here to use logic or to elaborate on who and what are these Sfarim Harbe. Unlike other Rishonim. I mean, sorry, you go on?
No, so I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
Why do we need Svarim? We have the Tanakh, like bring us a pasuk or something.
Now, I'm presuming when he means Sfarim Harbe, he doesn't mean Sifrei Chutz, he means the Torah, I presume. So, okay. He doesn't use what, at some point I'm going to show you Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, we'll look at Kuzari, we'll look at Rabbeinu Bachia, we'll look at Reb Sadi Gun, we'll look at some of the others who talk about what appears to be the same idea that the Rambam is speaking about, and they immediately roll off psukim such as Yeshaya, Ani Rishon v'Ani Acharon. I also want to point out, before I forget, and that is there appears to be a difference of emphasis between the way the Ani Mamin is popularly said, whereas as it is as to how he expresses it here and in Yad and in Yigdal. For example, let me point it out to you. We know this is not his lashon, but the popular rendering of the fourth of the Ani Mamins of the Ikrim is Ani Mamin b'Emunah Shleim Shabori Yisbarach Shemai Hu Rishon v'Hu Acharon. He is the first and he is the last. The Rambam here, I'm pointing out to you, does not talk about last. He only talks about, as we shall see, he talks about Rishon.
Well, the popular version has not been written by the Rambams.
Yeah. I'm acknowledging that, but I'm just pointing out that there could easily be an ideological or a doctrinal difference. Whereas in Yigdal, what do we say? Bam rishayin ve'ein reishis lereishisai kadmai lechol davar asher nimtza rishayin ve'ein reishis lereishisai. So just the tune that pops into my head. Yeah,
I don't know that.
that's what in Gibraltar. That's one of the tunes he used to sing in Gibraltar. Kadmai lechol davar asher nimtza. That's das stimmt. That fits with what we're learning here. That he is the first. Rishayin. Ve'ein reishis lereishisai. There is no beginning to his beginning. Relative. To go from the sublime to the ridiculous, just to show you how the, plus cachange, that Paul Davies quotes Stephen Hawking in one of his writings, where he says, asking what came before the beginning of time is like asking what is north of north. Unquote. And we have here this idea of ein reishis l'reishisai. He is the first. Now, again, that will depend to some extent on whether it's absolute or relative. And the minute you talk about first, by definition, you're bringing time, the linear flow of time into it. So we have no choice. We have to discuss time from the perspective of the Rambam, and we will discover very clearly in Moira that time, where he says absolutely clearly that time is a creation. Okay, and we will come to that, but we have no choice, because the minute you talk about, you see, if it means that he is just before anything else, you don't really need to talk much about time. If it means anything else that we can discover, he was before it, does not necessarily mean that time itself has a beginning. Just means that he goes back further and before anything else, relative to anything else. If, however, we are saying, and this is one of the big differences, if, however, we are saying he is, in absolute terms, he is the first, then we need to start talking and thinking about what time means. Well, let's see. So, I pointed out to you also that it's the way it's written formulated in the Rambam and in Yigdal, unlike the sort of the Animamin, is we're not really, don't seem to be concerned about Acharon, or the end of time. Does time have an ending? Does the world have an ending? We'll have to leave that. But he says here, very enigmatically, V'harayos lozeh b'sfarim harbe, which, far be it from me, but is not overly helpful. Okay, so there's proofs to it from Sfarim harbe. Now, v'zeh hayesoid haravi hu mashemoire olav mashenemar ma'oino Elokei kedem. Then he says, really interesting. He says, this fourth yesod is what is meant when we say in V'zois HaBrocha, this is the aliyah that the Chosan Torah gets. Ma'oino Elokei kedem umitachas royoi soilam vayegoresh miponecha oyev vayoyme hashmeid. Ma'oino Elokei kedem. Ma'oin is a place. It's one of the Gemara says in Chagig, it's one of the 7 levels of Shomayim. Ma'oin. It's Hashomayim, no, it's Machoin Kisai. Ma'oina Elokei kedem. Hashem is described as the God kedem. He is before, comes before other things. So interesting. The Rambam doesn't seem to be saying that this is, he didn't bring this as a proof. He seems to be saying that and this Yesod is what is meant by when it says Ma'oino Elokei kedem. And perhaps we'll revisit what he means with this pasuk. But it's not a proof. He didn't bring it as a raya. He says the raya is a bisfarim harbe. But this Yesod Ravi is is demonstrated by this pasuk. Fine. Now here, the next 3 lines, we discover something very fascinating. Let's learn it, and then I'll tell you something about this. V'da, says the Rambam. Remember, this is Pirush HaMishnayos this is the place where he delineates the Yud Gimel Ikrim, right, in his Akdama to Perek Chelek. What's the problem? You're looking a bit confused.
Yeah, just got a little lost, were we?
V'da. Just keeping going, unless you've got any better ideas, yeah? Okay. V'da, says the Rambam, and be aware. Ki hayesoid hagodoil shel Toras Moshe Rabbeinu hu hayois ha'olam mechudash. Ah, really interesting. So until now he said the Yesod HaRavi is that Hashem is prior to anything else. And now he comes along and he says, the HaYesod HaGodoil, very emphatic language. You know, like he starts Sefer Hamada with Yesod HaYesodos. And here we've got HaYesod HaGodoil. Very interesting. Be aware that the big fundament of the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, Hu Hayois Ha'olam Mechudash, is that the world didn't always exist. He's coming very clearly to, we'll have to talk about whether he's going against the Platonic model of creation or the Aristotelian one, but either way, he is negating both of those, as we'll see. The world is Mechudash. It was created, in other words. It wasn't always around. There was a view, and in modern cosmology, it wasn't till that long ago, right? Steady state theory, as it was known, yeah, that the world always existed. There was nothing in science and this was very, very common in the ancient world, right? That the world always was. Why should we suppose otherwise? It's really only since Einstein's, Schleifer, Hubble, blah, 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 that we now know, and we'll come to that later. But he said so the Rambam is now saying, he's now taking us, is he not into a different, in a different direction? So we're no longer talking about Hashem being before anything else. He's now talking about the world. Do you see what he's done? He's shifted his focus in this Yesod from Hashem being before anything to the Yesod being that the world basically that was created and didn't always exist. But we're not finished. The Yesod Gadol is Hayos Olam Mechudash. Yotzroi Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu fashioned it. Ubara'oi, and he created it. Now, in Kabbalistic terms, which I know the Rambam would not have been a big fan of, but it's kind of the wrong way round. But he's fashioned it. We do have a Yitzer Elikim Ubara'oi, and he created it. Achar ha'heder hamuchlat, after total, absolute nothingness. Mm-hmm. Before the Rabbeinu Shalom created, there was nothing. And this we're going to see is a reference to potentially the Greek Huli, and which the Ramban talks about, that there was some sorry? Correct. So what the Rambam is saying, just give me a second, Avi, you're absolutely right. It is crystal clear that the Rambam is saying here, yesh me'ayin. Yeah, absolutely. Ex nihilo creation. So ex nihilo, but he does this gradually. He says, the Yesod Gadol is that the world was created. It wasn't always there. Number two, not only was it created, it was not created out of some pre-existing ethereal protoplasm type of matter. The Huli, no. Heder hamuchlat. There was nothing. Nothing. He worked with absolutely nothing. He existed, and then he created from absolutely nothing. He created everything. Yes, Abby.
So we have to be precise to say that when we say before the world was nothing, there was nothing material.
There was no. There was nothing other than Hashem. Right. There was nothing. Not space, not time.
Right, so there was Hashem. So it wasn't nothing was before the world.
Nothing other than Hashem. Yeah, obviously. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In case it isn't obvious, it should be, yes, it should be stated. There was, yes.
The Tohu Vabohu is... I know Rashi explains that Bereshis Bara.
We're gonna come to that.
The beginnings of the creation are not in the beginning, right, so that's not the beginning. Was not that there was a state of Tohu Vabohu. So that's the beginning of Hashem's creation of the world.
Already after the.
So it was already like
we will address that.
Yeah.
Yes, very good point. Yeah. Very good point. It's coming up in source 5 in the Medrash. Yes. We're going to have to deal with that. Oh, no cheating. Let's do I know. It's my fault. You're absolutely right. Okay. But yes, Avi, absolutely. It should be self-evident, of course, when we say from nothing, Hashem existed, clearly. He was the only thing that exists. And then he created. You see, do you realize the problem? Listen to what I just said. And then presupposes time. We lack even the words. We need to be conscious of that. We need to be conscious of that problem in our thought structure. Yeah, we need to be aware of it, and we'll do some work on the Rambam as well about that. Right, weiter. Now let's go further. V'zeh shetire. Now the Rambam says really interesting. V'zeh shetire she'ani soivev soviv inyan kadmus ha'olam lefidas hafilosofim. And he's going to engage in a little bit of, not apologetics, so I have to be very careful what language we use, but he is explaining, he says, if you see me dancing around the idea of the origin of the world, kadmus ha'olam lefidas hafilosofim, like the philosophim, you should know it is only hu kedei sheyehei hamoifus muchlat al metziuso yis'ale. Let me explain to you what's going on over here. One of the ideas that we're going to be spending quite a bit of time with, and therefore we're going to have to get to grips with the nomenclature, the labeling, the terms that we use, is kadmus ha'olam, the fact that the world had a beginning. Okay? I have to be careful how I say this, and especially because we're not going to be able to get into it today, and I don't want to shock you too much. But it would appear, as we're going to see in Moira, that the Rambam, to some extent, from a philosophical or logical perspective, sits on the fence with regard to the world having always existed or being created. I'm using my words very carefully, okay? From a logical / philosophical perspective, the Rambam himself writes, okay, let me do this is too dangerous. So I don't want to be cancelled before I've started. So let me make crystal clear. There is no question that the Rambam, but this is going to go on YouTube. There is no question the Rambam makes crystal clear, as he has made here, that Hashem created the world. So the world did not always exist. Okay. But when in Moira, he debates the idea, he makes it clear, and he from a philosophical and logical perspective, he equivocates and he sits on the fence whether the world always existed or whether it was brought into existence. But that's only from within, looking within the prism of philosophy or logic. He makes it crystal clear that it's on the basis of Kabbalah, Nevuah, Torah, that of course, 1000%, as he said, it's Yesod HaGodol, just in case there's any doubt, that we do accept, and it is absolutely and utterly fundamental to accept that the world was brought into being by Hashem from absolute nothing. But now he's kind of excusing himself.
It's like making a disclaimer. He said
that's it. Now we understand.
Dance around those philosophical
That's right. V'zeh shetiresh ani soivev soviv inyan kadmus ha'olam lefi das hafilosofim. And that which you'll see that I might be dancing around, that a concept of the world having always existed on the basis of the philosophers, why am I doing that? Kedei sheyehei hamoifus muchlat. It is so that we can use this to demonstrate logically that Hashem has to exist. As I have k'moi shebi'arti ubirarti b'moira, as I have clarified and explained in Moira Nevuchim. Now, this, I don't know whether you realize, and I kind of realized, but I want to share something with you which I think is really just very important for your general knowledge. This passage in Pirush HaMishnayos teaches us something fascinating about the life of the Rambam. The Rambam wrote Pirush HaMishnayos in his, I haven't done enough total research, but in his late 20s, early 30s. 10 years or so later, he wrote his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah. 10 years after that, when he was roughly, I think he was 52, around about the year 1190, if I'm not mistaken. I'll supply you with the dates. He then wrote Moira Nevuchim. I'll say that again, and then I want you to ask me a question. In his late 20s, early to mid 30s, he wrote Pirush HaMishnayos in Arabic, 10 or so years later, he composed his magnum opus, the Yad, in Lashon HaKodesh,
Okay.
and in his, sorry?
So that came afterwards.
Yeah. And when he was 52, I think it is, I've got the dates here, he then composed Moira Nevuchim.
In Arabic.
Moira Nevuchim was also, definitely, was in Arabic. Ask me a question.
So where did it clarify it?
Sorry?
Where did it clarify
In Moira Nevuchim. Moira Nevuchim.
And that came afterwards?
Like what, the comparative study question? Is there any difference in Yad
If it came afterwards, then how could he have explained it?
Thank you. If he wrote Pirsha Mishnayos in his 30s, how could he be referring to a work that he wrote when he was 52?
So I missed that. Where's he referring to work?
I tell you, got to listen, guys.
Yeah.
The last words. Again.
Yeah, okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
You see this? And this opens up a subtopic which we're going to spend 10 minutes on.
Had a Moira Nevuchim version 1.
There is no indication. No, but we're going to do better than that. No, we're going to do better than that. We're going to do better than that. Okay? So I'm going to introduce you very quickly to, we're going to turn over the page because the meat of the sugya we're going to come back to, but we're going to take a slight detour into a little bit to do with the life of the Rambam and the some of the psakim of the Rambam. So we're gonna look at source 6, 7, 8, 9, and I didn't put a thing on it because I've had here 10. There are numerous places where the Rambam appears to contradict himself, no question about that, between Pirsha Mishnayos, mainly, obviously, because in Moira's primarily a philosophical work, so between Pirsha Mishnayos and Yad. So, how do we deal with these steers? So, Yad HaChazaka, the Mishnah Torah. Yad, Yudalit, the 14 books, Yad HaChazaka, yeah? So it's, yeah? Okay, so here, source 6, the Yad Malachi quotes the following. It says, Kishah Rambam says Atzma mi Pirsha Mishnayos l'chibur hayad, ein lismoich elo al masha kosev b'chibur, kach kosev arav Beis Yosef in Yerodei Siman Reish Tzadi Dalet. So this is more for your general knowledge, Rabbi Isai, yes? The Beis Yosef, Yerodei Siman Reish Tzadi Dalet says, if you find a contradiction between Pirsha Mishnayos and Yad, we follow what he wrote in Yad. Okay? Mm-hmm. That's the Beis Yosef. And the Knesset Agdola says that the Radvaz agrees with that. Okay? Really interesting is the Tshuvas Ramami Fano, Rabbi Nachman Azari Mifano, the Tshuvas Ramami Pano writes the following. Now, the Ramami Pano was quite early, 1548 to 1620. Okay? Well, early, it depends where you're coming from. So the Ramami Fano writes in his Tshuvas, listen to this. He writes, quote, Pirush HaMishnayos katnuson ninhu. The Rambam wrote these when he was a kot, when he was young. V'loi makshilan le'minayhu, and therefore you can't ask questions on it. He also quotes the Mahari Kurkus, who says, Ki loi dikdik b'mishnah kol hatzorech. The Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos wasn't always medakdik, writes the Mahari Kurkus, as much as perhaps he could have done. Source 7, there are a number, and this is only one, there are 4 or 5 Mishnah Lamelechs, which I came across, but here's one. Writes the Mishnah Lamelech.
Who's the Mishnah Lamelech? Sorry, I don't know the Mishnah.
On every page of Rambam, his name was Rabbi Yehuda Rosanes, and what year did he live in? I don't know off the top of my head. Let's see if it brings it here. I don't know off the top of my head, but he is one of the classic, you've got the Kesef Mishnah, the Lechem Mishnah, and the Mishnah Lamelech, right? And he writes as follows here in Hilchos Yom Tov, source 7, Aval nirali she'ein ze mei hakoishi, lefi shemotzinu b'mkoimos rabim, she'rabeinu b'chiburoi kosav hepech mima shekosav b'Pirush HaMishnayos. Writes to the Mishnah Lamelech, whatever the context is there, it's irrelevant to us. He says, you'll find many times that the Rambam in Yad writes the opposite of what he wrote in Pirush HaMishnayos. V'hatam she'rabeinu b'tchila osa Pirush HaMishnayos v'achar kach osa hachibur hagodol. He first wrote Pirush HaMishnayos. He then wrote his chibur hagodol, his magnum opus, the Yad. והעמק בוי, ובירר אוכל מתוך פסולס, וגם זה כאחד מהם. Now, what I'm going to point out to you today is slightly different. And this is absolutely fascinating. We are going to look, and by the way, go down to source 9, Shuvas Chasam Soifa, Al tarbe lahakshois mi pirish ha-mishnah lechibur hayad, ki kamo v'kamo pa'omim choza boy, v'zemuvu mikol ha-poskim. So the Chasam Soifa is also made, and this is just giving you a sampling. This is more for general knowledge than anything else, but I think it could be useful. The Chasam Soifa is made that the Rambam in many places was chayzer from one to the other. However, modern scholarship, chas v'shalom, not to argue with any of these go'inim or gedolim, but modern scholarship and access to his kisvei yad and his igros has thrown up a slightly different picture. And this is what we're about to see. And they simply didn't know. Source 8. We now have access, and I've given you a facsimile on this page. Those who are experts in the handwriting of the Rambam are able to discern that the Rambam throughout his life regularly updated his Pirush HaMishnah, sometimes crossing out entire lines, amending words, taking stuff out, and we can know this not only from having access. The Bodleian in Oxford has, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember whether it's 3 or 4 of the Sidorim. I think it's 3. I don't think it's 4. But the Sassoon collection, we have access. We have the Rambam's own handwriting of writing, and we can see where he crossed words out. And we're going to, in a minute, we're going to look at 2 of his letters where he has made himself that throughout his life, he changed it. Yes, he did change his mind, but he constantly updated his Pirush HaMishnayos and kept going back to it. And one of the big proofs to this is what we just read. That even that 20 plus years later, this, you should know, in your, go to back to source 1, please, and make a note, and I probably should have done it, from the word v'da on the 3rd page till the end is an addition that he wrote at least 20 years later. And you can see it. And we actually, this is the facsimile of what I've given you here. You can actually see it. And those who are experts, such as Rav Kafich and others, they are even able to see in terms of handwriting analysis, how the style of his writing changed, his actual handwriting. And those that are experts are able to say, you can see, this was his handwriting when he was younger. His actual handwriting, 20 plus years later, looked different. And you can see, and this, from the word V'da till the end, is an addition, and therefore, of course, he can make reference to the Meireh, which he had written when he was in 1191, when he was 52, even though this was written in his late 20s, early 30s. Absolutely fascinating. So now, isn't it interesting? Yeah. I just found it absolutely fascinating. But what is also, I suppose, really important, and by the way, if you remember in the last Yesod, I showed you something similar where he added something. When we were talking about the Nebuch HaPikoros, do you remember? I showed you how one piece wasn't in one, but it was in, because there was also a bit of an indication. There are other proofs, but this is one of the classic ones. I felt it was too good an opportunity to pass up. Now let's read in source 8, from what's in bold is the Rambam's Igros. So we'll read 2 pieces from his Igeres. So, B'Pirush HaMishnah Tikkun Rabbeinu B'Sifrei Me'os Mekomes B'Tikkunim K'tanim Gedolim. This is a commentary from one of the more modern Sfarim. So, we find in the Rambam's Ksav Yad of his Pirush HaMishnah hundreds of Tikkunim, some minor, some major. V'yesh afilu shemochak amud sholem. Occasionally he even overwrote and rubbed out an entire column. V'hechlif es nuschai, and he changed the text. And now the reason, let's listen to the Rambam himself in his own words. These are, what we have here in bold, are quotes from 2 different letters of the Rambam, and let's see what he says. The reason is as follows. The Rambam in his own words. Zeh hagimgum, the gimgum is when something is obscured, unclear. This Gimgum, Shehe Megamgimim al Pirush HaMishnah, the reason that these people, whatever it is that he's referring to, are querying the apparent difficulty and lack of clarity on the Pirush HaMishnah, who kulai mipnei shetikanti boim mekoimos, because I edited and amended it. Bayrei hakoil yodeya. Now this is absolutely fascinating. The Rebbeinu Shalom can know. Sherubam hitani bohem himoshchi achar hagaonim zal k'mei Rabbeinu Nissim v'Rav Chofetz v'Zulosam. He says, and do you know what the Rebbeinu Shalom can be made? Why did I need to edit and change what I wrote originally? Because initially I made mistakes because I was drawn to the writings of Rav Nissim Gaon and Rav Chofetz Gaon. So when he was younger, he's writing himself. When he was younger, he was more inclined to just accept the opinions of Rav Nissim Gaon and Rav Chofetz Gaon before he had developed some of his own opinions. And he says, and he uses the word hitani bohem. They took me down the wrong path. He uses the word tos, which is absolutely fascinating. And others, some of whom I struggle even to remember who they are. And even if it was I who made the mistake. So I mustn't put the blame all at their door because I was so ready and willing to follow them. And even if it was me that is the origin of the error, I'm not suggesting that in my late 20s, in my early 30s, I had already reached the fullness of the shleimus, of the final word. Of course not. I continued developing. And it's not that I never made a mistake. Adarabba. Kol mashin is barely chilufai. If at any point I discovered that what I had written, the opposite was true, chazarti mimenu tomid b'chol davar michiburi umitivi. I was prepared to write and to say I was wrong. So here's the Rambam in his own words. It was fascinating biographical insight. Number one, we learn that when he was younger, he was much more inclined to just follow and accept the opinions of the Goinim without questioning it more and possibly arriving at a different conclusion. Mm-hmm. He had not yet reached, but in his own words, his tachlis hashleimus. He writes in his own words, he made hundreds of amendments. He writes. Sorry, he doesn't write there hundreds. Sorry. He doesn't write hundreds, but we do know that it is hundreds by looking at the manuscripts. Mm-hmm. And he says, and sometimes I made a mistake, and I changed my mind from what I wrote when I was a young man, and I changed my mind in Ochanama, and I edited it. That's number one. And then in another halach, in another igeris, he writes, Masha zacharnu b'chibur hu hanochen. That which I wrote in Yad is correct. Asher ein sofek boy. V'kach zacharnu b'perush HaMishnah. And the truth is, this is exactly consistent with what I wrote in Perush HaMishnayos. You are asking me that you have a different Perush HaMishnayos. V'zois shebeyedchem hi hanuscha harishoina. You have Perush HaMishnayos version 1. Asher yotze miyodeinu lifnei hadiktuk. You have the first one before it was edited properly. V'nimshachnu b'zeh hamamar. And I followed in this thing, Mashazocha Bal Sefer HaRav Chofetz, back to Rav Chofetz gone. And because I mentioned what Rav Chofetz said, V'kasher bochanu es hamamorim, but when we tested the ideas, V'dikdaknu oisom, his baer, Shemashazochernu hu bechibur hu hanochoin, V'tiknu Pirush HaMishnah, and then we went back and we edited and changed and altered what I wrote in Pirush HaMishnayos. Absolutely fascinating. And here, here you can see in the what we've got added is what's added here in the margin on the left. He added the Veda, which we have. That's what he added here. This is from the Bodleian. Nitten liros bebeirur haysafa me'osan li'yisod haravi nichtva la gillion b'tzad smile. Now and the handwriting, by the way, you can actually see you can actually see. Look at the handwriting, which is in the main column, which is what he's writing. His handwriting when he was younger. It's in Arabic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then look at this handwriting. It's different. Definitely differences.
It's Arabic and Hebrew letters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, he was writing in Arabic and Hebrew letters, but here you actually have the Ksav Yad. So I must admit, today Rabbi Isai was a bit of a diversion. It was just we're really just getting started, but I thought this is a worthwhile and a fascinating subtopic to look into. And tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we will continue and go back to the meat and the yisoid of this yisoid, what this is. So now, just to finish off, to summarize, Pirush HaMishnayos Mark 1. He sees the Yesod HaRavi as Hashem is Kadmon. Relative to other, it's Behechlet. He does use the word Behechlet, but it is relative to anything and everything else. In Mark 2, he adds then, 30 years later, he then adds a whole different dimension to this Yesod, which is creation ex nihilo. And it kind of shifts a bit, and he uses very emphatic and strong language. Yisoid and Torah Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's already written Moira, and we'll look at some of the polemical and he dedicated 20 or so prokim in Chelik Beis, as we shall see, to go against Aristotle and Plato, and to give us the Das Torah on time, space, and creation as a Yisoid. And this is where we're kind of leading up to.